Hello and welcome to At World's Edge, the fantasy lore podcast. It wouldn't be Halloween without a closer look at the fan favorite armies of the Warhammer fantasy universe, the Undead. While the lore and product lines have changed over the years, vacillating between a unified force and two separate races, the Undead are traditionally broken up into the Vampire Counts of Sylvania and the Tomb Kings of Nehekhara. In this video, we'll be looking at the Undead from a different perspective, looking at what kinds of creatures they are, how they came to be, and how they fit into the lore on their own. To this end, we will mention where they're from, but we'll also be looking at them more in the way that Nagash or a witch hunter would, as all the same group, albeit one of those two has a much more positive view of these spooky boys. With that in mind, let's tuck in. All undead are born from the ambition of Nagash, an ancient king of Khemri and the father of necromancy. By combining the demonic summoning and binding focus of dark elf sorcery and the realm of souls-powered rituals of the Nehekaran priests, Nagash created an entirely new lore of magic, necromancy. At first, this was a purely augmentive spell lore, keeping the king alive long after he should have been, and without the decay of the priesthood. It soon advanced into battle magic, however, being both used to raise armies of the undead and attack armies of the Kemrian king. After learning how to turbocharge himself using warpstone and other nexus of power, necromancy became a true force in the world, eventually even reaching the point where the gods of chaos themselves would have to fear the great necromancer, as a world without life would kill the realm of chaos itself. The vampires are descended from Neferata, a queen of Lamia, a contemporary of Nagash. The queen attempted to recreate his elixir of life and become a second great necromancer. Not possessing the wisdom or magical knowledge of her forebearer, something went wrong, and while the queen would not age or decay, nor was she alive, her heart stopped and she became the first of the vampires. She shared her powers with members of her royal court, creating the five lines of vampires that have existed to this day: the Lamians, Von Karsteins, Strigoi, Necrarchs, and Blood Dragons. Each parent, each of these parents of the vampiric race would go on to sire more and more vampires, and these would as well. The method of vampiric reproduction is the blood kiss, literally an oral sharing of blood from a vampire to a mortal. Once granted, the recipient will fall ill, and after a time will die, and then rise undead and hungry. All vampires are magically attuned. Through their power, though their power varies just as in mortals, magical knowledge is required to make most of their magical ability. Some, like Manfred von Karstein and Zacharias the Ever-Living, are accomplished mages. Others, like Conrad von Karstein and Abarash the Blood Dragon, seem to use magic only instinctively, if at all. Vampires possess strength greater than any mortal, either human, elf, or dwarf, and resilience beyond all but the toughest of other races. They are fast, moving faster than the human eye can comprehend, though again this is a muscle which must be exercised. Lamians value strength and speed more than Strigoi, and their speed is thus lay more attuned. All vampires must drink blood regularly, and the kind of blood matters. A vampire will waste away to almost nothing if it is forced to drink only animal blood, whereas human, dwarf, or elf blood will keep them healthy and happy. Special blood, such as that of dwarf kings descended from Grungni and Valea, may grant additional magical or physical fortitude. Dragon blood is prized above any, for as soon as this blood touches their lips, they will be cured of the need to drink blood again. This doesn't mean they can't, but it means their greatest weakness is removed. Vampires feel the pull of Nagash in their mind, especially after he's reborn in the 2520s, and while he cannot control them like he can wights, he can kill them afar simply by thinking. This is to say that vampires are independent, and the actions they take are for good or ill, but they are their own. This independence and magical ability makes them natural leaders of the undead. Usually, vampires will be found at the head of an undead horde, army, or even nation, subordinate only to the others of their kind. While there are many examples of vampires who have been assigned to a necromancer as a subordinate, it's always by either a greater vampire or by Nagash himself, as these beings are intelligent and powerful, which lends itself to a certain amount of pride. If a vampire is unable to feed, either because he's being punished by his betters, which is common among the von Karsteins, or because he's been socially ostracized, like the Strigoi, they will degrade and become feral. This process first results in the Vargeist and later the Vargulf. These creatures lose their personalities and the ability to channel magic, but gain an animalistic level of strength and stamina that comes from their wild abandonment of societal restraint. When it comes to the vampire families, they tend to take after the traits of their progenitor, whether this is due to training of like minds, so nurture, or by some endowment of traits by their forebearer, nature is a matter of conjecture. Manfred von Karstein was far more magically powerful than his father Vlad, and greater also than Melchior, a second generation vampire of the Wusserand line of necrarchs, despite the latter being the more scholarly or magical bloodline by reputation. Like the vampires, Tomb Kings are fully independent and individual members of the undead species. Unlike the vampires, however, they did not choose this life. Nagash's first attempt to kill all life on Malice and raise them in thrall was a success. Powered by Warpstone, he sent first a killing wave of energy across Nehekhara from his Cripple Peak home of Nagashazar, then a follow-up blast that rose up all of the dead of that land, infusing their bones with spirits from the realms of the dead and binding them as his thralls. When he was struck down, the walls between the spirit world and the physical world remained battered, and the long mummified corpses of deceased Kemrian rulers awoke in their tombs, broke out into the sun. They had been promised a paradise of gold flowing with the coffers and tables, their families and servants around them. Instead, they inherited a mostly decayed body, a land blasted by foul magics and war, and their families and servants were there, but only in the basest of senses. Tomb Kings retain all of their memories and personalities. They were protected from domination by Nagash by powerful wards and incantations put upon them at the time of their incarceration by lich priests. They are strong of body and impervious to normal harm, as well as being armed and armored as befits kings of the ancient world. They have no magical ability in most cases, and both their level of power and authority is determined by who they were in life. The greatest of the Tomb Kings is Setra, but there are many great and terrible mummy kings who stalk the world, striking out with their armies in the desert or even across the oceans on their ancient galley fleets. Below the vampires and Tomb Kings are the rest of the undead, and these are not independent like the former, ranging from semi-individuals to those who have the barest of memories or even none at all, and all are bound to serve their undead masters. These are, in general terms, wights, undead bodies which retain some level of the spirit which once animated them in life. The greatest barbarian chiefs, often champions or leaders in life, are now but a slave to a necromancer or vampire, who needs a being that remembers how to wield a sword and shield. These beings are still great warriors, but do not think for themselves. When they were buried, it was in their full panoply of war, in a warded tomb called a barrow, blessed by their shaman and priests, and these measures protected their spirit, making it easy to guide back into their body by a skilled practitioner. Alternatively, a particularly strong chieftain may be sought by the spirit world in the spirit world by a strong necromancer and pulled into his or her old form. Such was the case with Krell, a body who Nagash found and matched with his old spirit to form a servant of terrible power. These warlords in life were guarded and attended by retinues of mounted and foot retainers. Many of them were afforded a small measure of protection that their chief was, meaning that as they're raised, their bodies remember a little of their skill, and they're protected better and are tougher and stronger than other undead. Facing these graveguard and black knights is a terrifying prospect for living soldiers, because they are no mere automatons. They are warriors whose bones still remember the feel of a blade in their hand. They will parry and strike, and they will do so while feeling no pain or fatigue themselves. Even the lowliest skeleton warrior of a vampire or tomb king has the briefest dash of memory of how to stand at attention, how to form a shield wall, how to block an incoming strike. They were, at the time of their death, given no special ritual or process. Instead, their body fell holding their blade. Perhaps it was buried, perhaps burned, perhaps trampled into the mud or drowned at sea. Their spirits are pulled back into their bodies they inhabited in life, but not completely. The essence of themselves is gone, lost to the afterlife, and what remains are the muscle memories of a soul, less skilled than a living man, not as tough as a blooded body, nor as strong as sinewed muscle, but not mindless either. These wights also appear in the lands of the Tomb Kings, where the greatest servants of kings were given lighter but still elaborate ceremonies of preservation. They were entombed with their legions and their greatest warriors, both those who died in battle with them and those that volunteered to be buried in the sand with their liege lord. Although sun-kissed and resplendently armed, these wights are essentially the same as their barrow-buried counterparts in the north. It's not only the mortal warriors that can be raised back as wights. The Hamurai of the sun god Ptah were once angelic warriors formed by a literal god and armored in his golden heavenly forges. When Nagash first emerged from his murder of the people of Nehekhara, Ptah sought to strike him down, but with his worshippers dead, his power was lessened. He thus sent his legion, 100 winged avengers, supernaturally powerful and armed with great swords and halberds. imbued with the power of the sun god himself. They fought Nagash single handedly for 40 days and nights, his warpstone empowered body unable to tire, and their stamina divinely given. Eventually, though, the great necromancer prevailed, and in a giant middle finger to the sun god which had failed to defeat him, he rose the Hamurai back up, twisting their divine forms and spirits into the dreaded Morghasts. His greatest lieutenants, those beings intended to lead Nagash's armies before the vampires were created. Thankfully for the world, the power necessary to bind demigod spirits into bodies was only possible due to the warpstone mining and ingestion of Nagash. And once he was gone, that level of power was no longer possible, and they became inert until the end times allowed magic to freely flow into the world again. Sometimes the spirit of an ancient warrior is not deposited into a body, but is instead used to animate a construct of bone, stone, metal, and wood. The Kemrians are most known for this, with their hero titans, necrolith colossi, war sphinxes, necrosphinxes, and ushabti being crafted by the hands of consummate artists and then being imbued with a soul coaxed from the afterlife by the lich priests. Like the whites, there doesn't seem to be a lot of personality left of the spirits here. And indeed, it's more like the spirit is providing only a base level of obedience and martial skill, but little to no independent thought. That said, these constructs have been trusted with the protection of Tomb King worlds without monitoring in many cases for thousands of years. Necromantic practitioners also make use of constructs, the most famous being zombies. Unlike whites and skeleton warriors, zombies have no mental or spiritual presence. They're puppets, more like a building block than a servant. There is evidence of zombie raw materials being used to construct fortresses, walls, and bridges at the direction of a necromancer, their bones and tissue being spliced and combined in ways that would make them useless as moving soldiers. The most advanced of these are the great Necrofex colossi, only created by the very greatest and most patient necromantic practitioners. These are unholy giants of flesh, wood, and metal formed into an anthropomorphic form. Unlike the constructs of the Kemrians, who bind souls into their constructs, these are magically animated creations which will crumble when the source of that magic sustaining them fails. Most of the time, this is a locus in the form of a wizard, but in some cases the world is so suffused with magic, such as during storms of magic, when more sleep is in close orbit, or at the end times, that these undead constructs will continue to function, albeit without direction, even after their creator is killed. Priests of the god of the dead throughout the world take care to aid spirits in their journey to the afterlife. When they fail, or if the spirit is uncooperative, it can remain in the physical plane, and if there is sufficient magical energy, it can even interact with the world and its people. Banshees are the spirits of evil women, who wail their murderous hate, literally scaring mortals to death. Cairn wraiths and hex wraiths are what happen to necromancers or other dread death magic practitioners who fail to fully retain their bodies and spirits and degrade into hateful, murderous, non corporeal beings that ride malice, cutting down their former sorceress peers, spitefully attacking what they can no longer be themselves. Spirit hosts are collections of spirits bound by a powerful necromancer into a bit of a roving band which can be sent against their enemies. Especially for vampires and necromancers, binding these spirits to their cause through physical enslavement allows them to harness a powerful entity who is entirely impervious to weapons and wields fear itself. The most powerful necromancers even to ride into battle atop a throne-like locus of power called a mortis engine, which chains whole gains of spiritual beings to bear them into battle, augment their armies, and attack their enemies. For the lich priests of Nehekhara, disturbing spirits in this way is sacrilegious to the highest order. Their philosophy is not significantly different from a priest of Mor, in that they believe the spirits of the dead deserve rest. And when they summon one up to power a construct, it's a matter of pride and ceremony, as well as theoretically voluntary on the part of the spirit. That respect doesn't apply to their enemies. The Casket of Souls is a magical weapon which traps the spirits of invaders and tomb raiders, and then uses them to assault the enemies of the Tomb Kings. No undead army would be complete without a rotting menagerie, and all manner of undead lords enjoy the power and prestige of a personal zoo at their side. As we talked about earlier, there's a real benefit to a vampire killing and eating a dragon, but there's another one as well, raising it back as a mount. The dragon is a being of immense power, echoing back to a time before chaos or the old ones, and while a dead dragon is less powerful and no longer breathes a furnace at its enemies, it is still a massive advantage. The same is true of the more ancient bone dragons, such as the kind that bear mighty tomb kings and lordly hierophants into battle. Although its bones are bleached and diamond hard from age, The great bats of Sylvania, the size of small dragons themselves, are brought back as truly terrifying terrorgeists, sometimes as the mounts of more bestial Strigoi vampire lords, but other times merely as unchained beasts to horrify the foes of the vampire counts and their thrall necromancers. In all of these cases, these creatures are merely slaves animated by magic. Like the zombies we spoke of before, they do not maintain part of their spirit and instead are bound to the will of their rider or animator. This is on full display when living dragons, beings of immense pride, come face to face with these undead abominations. Lesser than dragons, but still clouding the sun for their ground-born peers, giant fell bats, swarms of vampire bats, and kettles of carrion are raised by practitioners to harry the flanks of their enemies and pick off lone squads or war machines. These creatures can be imbued with their limited animal spirits, driven only by the magical direction of their leader and their base instincts to feed and annoy. Even on land, creatures such as dire wolves, the man-sized wolves which prowl the old world's forests, are brought back to life by foul necromancy to serve the lords of that land, like the hunting hounds of their mortal compatriots. Horses are entombed with their riders, or risen from the battlefield with only their base instincts and training to serve a rider. In the far south, holy scarabs and spiders who live in the tombs and die their short lives are raised back to serve the true kings of that area. These creatures are not automata like the zombies and bone dragons, rather, they're risen back with their animal instincts intact, as these were valued in life as they are in death. Indeed, it is likely if one were to walk the streets of a Tomb King city or a Sylvanian town, there would be fields in the bizarre sight of skeletal horses grazing on unwholesome grasses, picking up blades that fall through their skinless skulls. I'm sure you've noticed some missing units of the iconic and expansive undead within the Warhammer world, and this is because not every servant of the Lords of Undeath are in fact dead themselves. It's important to remember that the purpose of necromancy, the reason it was founded, is because of the peculiarly human fascination with prolonging their short lives. Undeath, while it accomplishes its goal, is only partially successful. Truly accomplishing that goal would be not dying in the first place, and this is what the necromancer and lich priest have done. These wizards use magic to extend their own lives unnaturally. Necromancers cannot do this for more than a few centuries, and then they either die and move on, come back as a Cairn Wraith, or are granted the Blood Kiss. Lich priests have discovered the secrets to immortality through magical, spiritual, and alchemical means known only to them. At this order of Cetra, the lich priests of his day poured their knowledge into discovering how to prevent a spirit from leaving the body and journeying to the halls of Usirian. After 5 generations of work, they succeeded. I'm not personally aware of the youngest lich priest, as theoretically they could still make new ones if they were to invite new members into their order, but the eldest are potentially 5,000 years old. It is these aged lich priests that power the massive Kemric Titan and smaller but still gigantic tomb scorpions. These are constructs, but rather than being powered by spirits like we talked about earlier, they're home to the physical and spiritual remains of lich priests, much like dreadnought armor for these ancient men and women. The evil power of necromancy is pervasive and doesn't only poison the world around it, but the humans as well. Humans exposed to necromancy for too long degenerate into the hunched, cannibalistic ghouls. There are communities of ghouls that worship Nagash in the foothills of Cripple Peak, Strigoi loyalist ghouls in the marshes of Morcaine, ghoulish nobles in the castles of Sylvania, and many, many more. When a ghoul finds itself munching on not a normal human, but a vampiric one, it undergoes a horrific conversion, growing in strength and size and ferocity, and becoming a crypt horror. These ghouls and crypt horrors are the irregular adherents to the necromantic overlords of their land, but they are not in any way undead, and when they do die, they will not return as a ghoul, but either as a skeletal warrior or a zombie, should their lord choose. Thank you for taking the time to watch with me today. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the spooky side of the Warhammer world, and that I will see you again in the future. Please share this video with your friends, like and subscribe, and most importantly, have a happy Halloween.